True leadership is the ability to create or identify the clarity to move forward when there isn't a clear path, when you don't know what's coming next, when you're not certain, but you still have to lead. I think that is the hardest thing that leaders don't realize. If you have all the answers, it doesn't take much of a leader.
Welcome to the True Leadership Podcast, where we sit down with executive leaders to explore what leadership really means through the lens of their stories, their wins, their struggles, their vision, and their lessons along the way. I'm Ty Hammond, founder of One Mountain Leadership and creator of the True Leadership Approach, an awareness-based path that helps leaders shift their focus from what to do about their problems to how to grow from them. Whether you're just stepping into leadership or are well-seasoned and at the top of your game, your potential won't be realized following someone else's script, but you can draw insights from their stories and turn it into wisdom by putting it into practice in your own life. Welcome to the True Leadership Podcast, where we explore the essence of leadership beyond tactics and performance by sitting down with executives to hear what matters most to them. I'm your host, Ty Hammond. Today's guest is Colleen Brown. Colleen is a seasoned corporate director and former public company CEO who advises boards and leadership teams at critical strategic inflection points. She currently serves on multiple public and private boards and is vice chair of Panarchy, where she explores organizations as complex adaptive systems. Colleen's background spans Fortune 500 strategy, Fortune 1000 corporate development, and CEO leadership, giving her a rare ability to integrate governance with execution. She's known for guiding organizations through transformation, CEO succession, capital allocation, and modernization efforts, helping boards act with clarity before disruption fully materializes. It's my pleasure to have Colleen here with me today. Welcome to the show, Colleen.
Well, thank you for having me. It's great to be here, Ty.
Absolutely. I always start here with this question. Every leader, of course, has a beginning. Who we are as leaders, not only in work, but in life, starts taking shape long before we end up in any executive position of leadership. I'm curious, who is someone from your early life or an early experience that really shaped the leader and the person that you are today?
I always struggle with this question when I get asked because there's just so many people I want to provide an attribution for, because I think it takes more than one person to shape us and to really affect our lives. But I also realized that a great part of my development early on and the impact I had was really the absence of leadership and how that impacted me. And a lot of things happened when I was younger. Big family, early loss, moves, and kind of a vacuum of leadership in many ways. And as a result, I became very observant and very watchful about how things worked, not just who was the boss, but how did things really get done in the household or in school or wherever I was. So for me, it was a lot more about what I was missing and what I was observing and how I could fill that void, whatever that void would be.
I'm curious, how do you feel like that, and to whatever extent you're willing to expound, but that experience of loss, that vacancy, that absence, shows up in how you lead and how you are in the world today?
Well, I lost my mother when I was young. I was 4. She was 34, and it was a car accident, so it was very abrupt. And, I was quite young. So as a result, there was a lot of not remembering things and not knowing things. I didn't know how to make a bed, as I was growing up. And it took a while to realize I didn't know how to make a bed. And so through time, things that were absent, I had to take the initiative to go figure it out, to find or to observe or figure where can I learn these things that were kind of basic in my other friends' households. And so not having that kind of leadership in the household definitely impacted my ability to read the room, my ability to do what needs to be done. It had to get done. Later on, my stepmother, my dad remarried, was quite absent because her daughter got non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And so she was in the hospital extensively. Well, big family. There were 10 kids. And so I was the oldest in the middle, but I was the oldest girl. So somebody needed to go shopping for groceries. So that somebody became me, and that was before I could even drive. So it was navigating all of that because my dad traveled for work. We all kind of took care of ourselves, but it was figuring out how to take care of things in the household. How do you do laundry? That was like 20, I think it was 20 loads of laundry a week. That probably would have been more today, but back then it was about 20 loads of laundry a week. And how do you do all of that and still get good grades and get scholarships you need to get into school? So the absence of leadership and me trying to step in, and sometimes it wasn't possible for me to step in. I couldn't take somebody to the doctor. I wasn't old enough to drive. People had to be called in, neighbors, grandparents, who were at a distance. So it was tricky, to say the least.
Well, I just want to, offer, first of all, thank you so much for sharing. And I'd be remiss to share equally that I also lost my mother when I was 4.
Wow.
She was 26 years old. And
So you
so
do relate. Yeah.
very, very much. And there's so much it's so interesting. I kind of knew even before, in what you were sharing as you're talking about the absence and the ways that calls one forward,
Mhm. Mhm.
calls one up so
Right.
early, so
And
early.
especially when you don't even have the title, right? You're not the boss, but you need things to get done. You need help with all the dishes. You need help making the house work and run. And people need to get out the door to school, and all of that needed to happen. So you're
And
right.
you had siblings as well?
There were 10 kids.
Wow. So taking a big position of leadership as it's called, it's like identifying the need. I think to be honest, and not to take too much time here, but the thing that you had said, which really struck me, was, and I feel like this is such a necessary aspect of leadership, of being human in general, is just like the paying attention and studying what's actually happening so that we can have the vision to respond what's happening
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. And know when you're old enough, or you can see it clearly enough to know when you're in over your head, which was a lesson I learned quite early.
I'm curious to have you maybe expound just a little bit on that. How do you, I don't actually think that I got that lesson as early as I would have maybe liked.
Oh, it would, show up in little things like, ironing. I didn't know how to iron, but somebody had to. And so, yeah, I ruined a lot, actually, shirts and whatnot, because I never knew that turning it all the way up was not what you're supposed to do. And synthetic stick to iron. So a trial by fire, if you will. Um, I never really thought about who had the checkbook when you went to the grocery store. So, my first round was convincing the gal who actually knew my grandmother that I was good for it. And yeah, I didn't have a check to give her the fairway.
Wow.
So that was clearly in my head that I realized I didn't know everything I thought I knew, right, when I walked in the door. And being humble enough to find a way to work my way through it and then move on. My brother was wherever he was, probably at the comic book store or something. He's the one who drove me. But yeah, I mean, just knowing how to make it all happen and, when to back out and how to laugh at yourself, I guess.
Plenty of that is needed, I'll tell you, my experience. I'm curious to hear how the lessons of such a formative experience might work their way out in the rest of our conversation here. Let me, of course, in this podcast, we're exploring the essence of leadership, true leadership. That's going to mean different things to different people. What does true leadership mean to you? What makes a true leader in your eyes?
There's so many definitions of leader, but for me, very specifically, how I think that true leadership is the ability to create, to identify the clarity to move forward when there isn't a clear path, when you don't know what's coming next, when you're not certain, but you still have to lead. I think that is the hardest thing that leaders don't realize. if you have all the answers, it doesn't take much of a leader, right? So
It's I'll just share with you my one of my favorite definitions. Actually comes from at least one interpretation of the etymology of leader, which is an old Nordic word "leth," which is to go forth, to cross a threshold, and to die first, which literally meant into the unknown. I think it was a battlefield reference in this particular case, but still represents that willingness to go into the unknown first, to lead into that.
there's a little Star Trek in you.
and and in etymology for sure.
Yeah. To go where no man has gone before.
Yeah. What difference have you seen that make, that willingness to, that clarity in uncertainty? And why does that matter?
Well, you can get charismatic leaders, right? You can get leaders who have a vision and they're just so focused on that vision. You can get all kinds of different kinds of leaders, but ultimately it matters that however you lead, it's like you're accountable, that you are responsible for the outcome of the complexity, for the outcome of how you respond to the changing environment. And that's never more true than now, because it's all happening, and it's all happening so simultaneously and so quickly that we have to reiterate fast. We don't have to wait 3 months for the, Pony Express to deliver mail to us, right? I mean, this stuff is happening, and it's happening real time. And I think coming out of television and media for me trained me up well to recognize disruption, because disruption was fast when I started my career, and it's just gotten faster. And as a result, I'm more transparent. And so you have really smart people who are really educated, maybe the most educated in history, who now have access to all the information about your organization at their fingertips, arguably, through Claude work. I mean, you can ask it anything and find out what's going on all over your organization, let alone every filing. I can ask ChatGPT, what are all my competitors doing in technology? Give me a comparison chart. And it's done in 20 seconds, not even that, 10. So I think that the transparency, the information, the education has really stepped up decision-making processes, systems, and the ability for organization to make decisions and to adapt or to be even resilient, because there is such a thing as, burnout, or I think I saw a podcast the other day on hope burnout for the millennials or Gen Y, where they just don't know how they're going to move forward in life versus, we just dove in because houses were going up and interest rates were going up. So we figured dive in now, buy it now. Little did we know that $100,000 house we were buying back then is now like $600,000. And the income didn't keep up with that commensurately. So, it takes 4 times the average income compared to when I was first buying my house. That's a loss of hope. And so understanding how that is in fact impacting all of the folks in your organization, I think is the importance of leadership and relating and figuring out you're part of the solution or you're not going to have a workforce. So that's just one thing I think a lot about. So basically what I was saying is the pace has outstripped the ability for an organization to adapt.
100%. And, part of what I'm hearing in that, when I think of like the true leadership quality of, there's the capacity to move forward in uncertainty, like to just decide without having that perfect information, because you're never going to have it. You never actually did have it, but now you know that you don't have it.
Yes.
And where does that capacity, okay, I've got to choose, that capacity to actually to make that choice, to decide.
And there's a different way of gathering that information these days. It used to be a very hierarchical, and now you're seeing a great deal more matrix, remote, distributed workforce. And so how you gather your information, how you listen like we're doing on Zoom is very different than how we might listen sitting there face to face in person in your office, for example. And so the world from the way we were built after World War II for corporations is very different than the world we're in today. And yet we're still built, like with structures in place that still resonate with the way we did things 40 years ago, 50 years ago, 60 years ago. And so maybe even 70. Uh, and so today, I think what we need to figure out is how are we going to be built for the future as leaders, as organizations, as decision makers, as workforce. I mean, I think this is a huge void and something I get pretty amped up about. I think it's important that we start tackling these issues sooner than later.
Well, similarly, I think that question, what is true leadership and what does the leadership look like today that we need, is a worthwhile question to stay humble and curious about.
Right. Hmm.
So I'm curious to hear from you. Of course, all the journey of life and of leadership is shaped by fundamental turning points along the way. Can you share about a time when you realized that your way of leading or living no really longer was meeting the demands of work and life, and real growth was needed, a turning point in your life?
There are so many turning points. I always think I'm going to write a book called Nine Lives because I had like nine turning points in life. But probably the hardest or the most challenging turning point was when I decided to step away from day to day work and move into corporate board work and advisory work, consulting work, if you will. I don't do a lot of consulting. It's really not my strength, but I do really enjoy the work on corporate boards and the advisory work I'm doing with some companies. Um, and what's interesting about that is you move from this incredibly intense environment where you're on 20 hours a day, truly, and oftentimes 6 and 7 days a week, depending on the week. And that structure and that constant pressure and presence in your brain of things to do, checklists, that 360 that I'm always working, is very different than when you step off of the day to day. And suddenly that structure you miss. And it's the absence of that structure that forces you to start really thinking about meaningful things and not just things you check off your list and not just, what's expected of you. Now it's what do you expect of yourself? And so suddenly, I think when I made that decision, I was 53 when I made that decision. It was a lot of introspection, a lot of self reflection, a lot of understanding that it didn't need to duplicate what I had at home, which I did try to do at first, set it up. I had an assistant and I had my desk and, I had my books and I was making phone calls and I don't know what I was doing. Anyway, I think the reality is I realized that work comes in a lot of form, fashion. And for the first time in my life, I got to shape my work according to how I wanted to do it versus how corporate America wanted me to do it. And so that was a big transition.
What do you feel like you had to outgrow or let go of in order to grow into that next phase? And I just say, I literally just got off of a conversation with someone who's, and I speak with lots of leaders who are in transition and will move from corporate world into entrepreneurship and consulting role or all of these things. So I think this is a really worthwhile, thing to explore. But what do you feel like you really had to outgrow in order to grow into that next phase for yourself?
Well, in my case, unfortunately, it was hard for me to learn from others. So I kind of needed to learn it myself. And so being an entrepreneur suited my personality, but I didn't like the patience that it took to incrementally grow at such a small scale. Right. And so that was a very different experience for me. And of course, I've been in corporate America in big corporations for a long time where, if you need an attorney, it isn't called the attorney, it's which one. What, do you need, well, as you can imagine, 40, 50 attorneys in a big corporation, what do you need? A First Amendment attorney versus and so you got specialists. To be an entrepreneur, you're that attorney. You're trying to figure it all out on your own, or use AI to figure it out, which isn't a good idea. You still need that third party to take the insurance responsibility of making that decision, whatever you're doing. But I would say that it was very difficult for me to leave the structure and realize everything is a system, nature, body, ecosystem, because I didn't go to biology for a reason. I don't want to think about that stuff, but now I'm having to think about it because of how you have to take care of yourself and work out because you have no excuse, right? You're free to have your time and use it as you should, not versus not what's demanded of you. So I think the hardest thing for me was leaving structure and moving to what I call everything's a system, an ecosystem, which is what panarchy is, by the way. Panarchy is that whole ecosystem of how things work. Kind of like, you've got anarchy, you've got monarchy. Panarchy is the world and how things work. And I found that's where I'm really now understanding that that's my passion and it was when I first entered undergraduate school and went into political science my first year, thinking, because it was Who Gets the Cookies by Michael Seago was my favorite textbook, right? That's like, it's how does it work? Well, that's what I realized. That's what I love finding out. But it took me a lot of years to understand that it's okay to pursue that at this age. And it's okay to pursue that at this stage of life. It's all about how does everything work together and to get you thinking about how the system in decision making, in families, in school districts, in life. And it makes it easier not to be so tough on yourself and judgmental on the organization when you realize, it isn't just the leader, it isn't just how they're set up, it is a history of how they operate. So recently I saw a documentary by PBS in Minneapolis on the history of law enforcement in the state of Minnesota. It wasn't a structure thing. It was truly who they hired, how they hired them, and then how it worked, not what was on paper, but how it worked through history. And it was more enlightening to inform me on what happened here in Minneapolis than anything I'd read or seen before, because they approach it as a series of decisions and how the system worked and not necessarily who was the governor at the time.
I so appreciate that perspective. In a separate conversation, we could easily geek out on systems and complexity theory.
Yeah.
At any point, I would be happy to do that. But the thing that I really want to draw awareness to is how, and I start with that first question about what shaped us. So intentionally, because I so often see, like you just said, the extent to which you're paying attention to how things work, and that was right there in your first answer to things, and how you were paying attention as you were a child, because it was by necessity to some extent, right? So interesting, just seeing that through line through your life.
Right. And I didn't realize it until I had time to actually contemplate, and I started to realize that has been a through line my whole career and in my life. And it's also a big part of leaving the structured ranks was realizing I think we all kid ourselves we have control and none of us really have control. And as a result, it's more about understanding how we establish ourselves or what we're doing to be adaptive. And I think that's a big part of my philosophy as I've led throughout my time. I couldn't do, for example, what some of the male bosses could do. Back in the day, I couldn't put my feet up on the desk and read the newspaper while I was on the job, even though that's what my predecessor did. It just wasn't done by me, by a girl, And so you started to realize, okay, just because they do it doesn't mean it's going to work for me. And just because how I was successful in the past when I moved companies, which I did, that the way I was successful in the past didn't necessarily mean that I was going to be successful doing the same thing over at this company. And so, again, paying a lot of attention to how do I be the most relevant in this company? Because surprisingly, and I didn't know this until I did make some changes, that companies are very, very different from one to another in the same industry.
Yeah. Well, we've all heard that saying, "What got you here won't get you there."
Yeah,
I actually think it's even more complex than that. It's what got you here might keep you from getting there. In other words, things change so much that it's not just like upgrading. Sometimes it's a wholesale questioning everything
you're
about
right.
the way that we've done things.
So it's what you're saying, you're outlining, it's a constraint. And we should be
Absolutely.
exploring that. And that's hard to figure out.
Yeah, that's really the deep work of identifying what assumptions we've gathered along the way,
Right.
being able to
Or
challenge those and how they prevent us from seeing the complexity of things as they are.
right, right. Yeah. So much to unpack there.
I, I have a feeling that we might have to have another couple of these. We'll see.
Yeah.
uh, Obviously, so much growth there, even in the conversation, even from, gosh, taking from early losses all the way up to courageous steps out into doing your own thing. That's a lot of growth. What's been the most valuable investment that you've made in yourself over the past several years or in your journey for your own growth?
Probably not what you expect. I think the most valuable investment I've made is to give myself grace, to kind of not hold myself to unrealistic expectations and understand I'm not perfect and maybe I don't even want to be perfect. And sometimes the most fun is in messy situations and enjoy it every step of the way, even if it's tough. There are many great memories. So I think investing in me, I made some difficult board decisions, decisions to join boards that others might not have chosen. For example, I was the individual recruited to be chairman of American Apparel when they were going through their mess. And a lot of my colleagues thought that might be the end of my board career. And I'm like, well, if I don't do it, who will? I mean, you got 10,000 employees there. This is an important company to try to save. And I didn't know what was going on other than they had a mess on their hands and they were, you know, overly indebted. And so I did take on that challenge and it was a challenge. There's no doubt it was a huge challenge. And, the founder and founder led companies are a different animal than corporate, traditional, been around for 100 years companies. And so it was a very interesting not to unravel.
Strikes me as a real willingness to, I mean, we've talked about the unknown a little bit. Certainly that's the unknown, but it sounds to me like a fair amount of willingness to engage discomfort or challenge.
I think that's true. What I've always said is I need intellectual stimulation, whatever work I'm doing. So that comes with some of these more knotty issues. But I also now have the luxury of saying, and I'm going to do that with people I like. And then on top of that, whatever I do now, I better make a difference. And those are my criteria when I decided to take on American Apparel and be the chairman and make some very difficult and tough decisions. And was it fun? No. Were great memories made? Absolutely. Came out of that with some of the best colleagues I've ever met. Weird, but true.
Speaking of making a difference, what's your vision for your leadership, your legacy, or the impact that you want to have in the years ahead?
Honestly, I'd like to create a new asset class, and it isn't on governance. I think the asset class is in building systems and understanding, and maybe it goes in HR, maybe it's a whole new division, but the world is changing to a degree that governance isn't enough anymore. And we need to know how to monitor, measure, and affect the system in which the decisions are being made. because it's ridiculous. I see companies like American Apparel go through pre-pack bankruptcy and come out, and there's no way to run it going forward because they're still doing the same things. All they did was have their debt forgiven. And guess what? A few years down the road, they're going to be in the same position. So I'd love to see us identify this asset class that will make a difference in understanding how to keep companies clear on what is holding them back. And it isn't, we all can write governance documents. We can all write charters. We can all write, all the bylaws and everything. And on paper, it can say one thing, but is that how it really works, right? We have a code of conduct, but we all have been in organizations where you can point out, well, that guy's not following the code of conduct. Nobody's saying anything. And so how do we get to a system that changes this? How do we create system intelligence layers? That's something that I'd really like to make a difference in.
Well, I sign up for helping with that vision. Sounds incredibly important, and agreed. It's not possible to effectively operate within complex systems when we're treating them like complicated ones.
Yeah, and if we don't figure this out, companies are going to be falling by the wayside left and right. And real good companies with a lot of hard-earned money invested in the stock market. And so that's why I think this is important. And I'm also extremely bothered that the era of our companies, we die off so quick as companies compared to, I think, what we could. Why is a lifespan of a company? I think it's like 40 years in the US. It's a little bit different in Europe. Why is it so low? It just, and in part because we don't adapt. In part, there's other reasons.
Well, that's a great lead into my next question. For you personally, what do you feel like are your current places where you're looking to grow and adapt, where you're being stretched most? What is it gonna, what are the ways that you're gonna need to grow in order to really help you to herald in this vision for a new asset economy?
Recently, a year and a half ago, I joined a crypto stablecoins company called Backed. It's the backbone of the internet, or excuse me, of crypto. And it was a kind of, it had its challenges, and they were trying to turn the company around. And I got asked to come in because I'm known for a solid player, don't get rattled, know how to do hard things. And every day when I ran my course, I was listening to a podcast about crypto because I didn't know anything about crypto. I knew a ton about governance. I knew a ton about being a public company. I started my career in banking. I knew a ton about, the fintech market, but I did not know crypto or stable coins or payment systems or any of that. And through the commitment to the podcast and then just being a student of the industry, I truly believe our monetary system is going to change and that we're going to laugh, our grandchildren's grandchildren will wonder what money is. Really? You had money? There's leftover money? What? There's money here? We no longer have pennies? What do we do with our pennies? So I think that changing the monetary system in the United States and in the world is going to be fundamental to everything we think through. Every company's going to have to think through it. And I believe it's more secure than currency and more traceable, if you will. And the exposure, so such a nanosecond, it is just not almost no friction in the marketplace. And so it's better for the consumers. It just has all the hallmarks of being a smart move to change our monetary system. And if we do that, it affects every company in the world, let alone every organization. So that's the biggest thing I'm working on right now, is not that I'll ever be a master, but mastering it enough to understand how this disruption is going to impact all the organizations that I work with, advise. Because it's fundamental.
Well, I don't know if we can prepare for those kinds of things, but I do believe that the work of adaptiveness is being ready for anything. So
yeah, I really believe you got to go through the tough stuff to get to the other side, and that's what we're doing right now.
Yeah. So this last question here is a little bit more of an invitation. I want to offer you the time and the space here to offer to our listeners whatever it is that's most in your mind and heart to share right now, whatever that is.
Wow, I didn't get prepped for this. Hmm. Um, I do think that all of us should find a way to rein in our our polarization. And this is an outcome of the internet and you know, anonymity, if you will, on the internet that has caused such a polarization that it is very difficult to have smart conversations that don't escalate into finger pointing. And we're on the planet together. We got to figure this stuff out, and it doesn't help to feed the fire. And so, how we can become rational again. And I know we've studied the history on this, back in the day. We all know the history of newspapers and yellow journalism, and used to be wealthy families bought these papers. They still own some of them to have power and control and the headline and have influence. That's all going to still go on today. But we're an educated population. We've got to find a way to come together on what's best for our nation, let alone what's best for the world. Because, like it or not, talk about leadership. You know, we are in so many ways looked to as a leader, not that we should be, or not that I think some of us, some would say, yeah, we should be. Some would say we shouldn't be. But regardless, we're a strong influence in the world. And I think we should have better behavior.
Colleen, I so appreciate the wisdom that you've shared here today with me. I really gotten so much out of our conversation, and I'm sure that whoever listens is equally going to benefit from what you've shared here today. Thanks so much for being our guest on the True Leadership Podcast.
I really appreciate it, Ty. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure.
That's it for this episode of the True Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, you can subscribe to YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to this to catch future episodes. This conversation was brought to you by One Mountain Leadership, where we help leaders grow the capacity, confidence, and presence of true leadership through the True Leadership approach. To learn more about the approach, our offerings, our community, and how we can help you realize your potential in both leadership and in life, visit us at onemountainleadership.com.